Hey everyone, welcome to Byte-Size Impressions. I'm Mike, and we need to have a conversation. I know that a lot of people really want to believe that video games are being created for the sake of the art, but that's simply not true. Instead, video games are developed to make money, point blank. And if video games weren't making money for these publishers, they would not be investing the money into getting them made, period. That's just the beginning and end of it. The reason that we need to talk, though, is that recently there was a leak regarding a whole bunch of stuff about Insomniac games and what Sony's plans were with them moving forward. And while I don't really like to discuss leaks that are brought about on this sort of a scale and unethically at that, basically this studio was held at ransom, being like, hey, give us a whole bunch of money or we're just going to leak all of these files that we have hacked and stolen from you. And they didn't pay, and that's exactly what happened. Now we know all of these different Marvel-based games that Insomniac are working on and releasing within the next handful of years. I'm not going to go into detail about that. I only want to focus on one piece of information here that is large enough that is too difficult to ignore as a result. And that is what Sony and Insomniac were planning to do with the release of Spider-Man 3. Now, essentially, the way that this was going to go down is that Spider-Man 3 was not going to just be a single release at launch. It was going to be Spider-Man 3 Part 1, and that was going to sell for $49.99. Day and date with Spider-Man 3 Part 1, there was going to be a multiplayer component that was also going to be sold on its own for $49.99. That's already $100 as opposed to just the $70 that they've been charging us for these games all along. Well, not all along. $70 only really started happening a few years ago, but I digress. 1 year after the release of Spider-Man 3 Part 1 and this multiplayer component was when we were going to see Spider-Man 3 Part 2, also to be sold for $49.99. This is what we need to discuss. This is what's so alarming, right? Because we have seen things out there, right? From Rockstar Games, from the head of that publishing company, that they feel like, you know what, our games are worth more than $70 because of how much attention to detail that we have and how much engagement that helps to drive. People play our games for years and years and years after they launch. They're worth more than that. Although there is a market to consider, and I think what they were alluding to with that was that they know that if they push too hard with the financial model too soon, it really could be a bad thing for them. Yes, it's Grand Theft Auto and the other games that they make are insanely popular, but you still have to toe the line somewhat so that you don't turn people against you. And I think Sony is really trying to do that here with Spider-Man 3. I think, they've been saying for a long time too, people at the top in Sony have been saying that like this business model of creating games with such ginormous budgets, it's not sustainable long term, and I don't know how they're going to do it. Well, they're going to do it by splitting up a major franchise game like Spider-Man 3 into two parts. We don't have to worry about the multiplayer component. Allegedly, that has been scrapped some time ago, so you're probably only looking at Spider-Man 3 Part 1, Spider-Man 3 Part 2. So if you want to enjoy the entire story of that game, instead of spending $70 for one release to be in and out like you were with Spider-Man 2018, with Spider-Man 2, you're going to have to buy that game in two parts at $50 each for $100. Meanwhile, on the internet, people have been arguing back and forth for years and years and years to a point where it never made sense to me over which console competitor was better. Was it Microsoft with the Xbox? Was it Sony with the PlayStation? Neither of them. They were both in the background trying to think of ways to be able to extrapolate more money from you. More and more and more, and it's never going to end. And they're always going to be looking for brand new ideas in order to be able to make that mission accomplished for them. I mean, if you think about it, way back in the day, you bought a video game, you brought it home, they weren't connecting to the internet, you just got to play them. If they were buggy, they were buggy. You would have to learn to work around that. In rare occasions, there were times where you were able to mail in a cartridge to get a replacement or something because they actually did produce a fix because of an error that was critical enough to warrant that sort of a recall. But ever since games started connecting to the internet, it didn't take them long to realize, hey, we can start selling you little pieces, drips and drabs of DLC for a very small price. Well, then DLC pieces turned into DLC packs. DLC packs turned into season passes that if you bought the season pass, you would basically be guaranteed content for that game that was released over the course of the following year. But of course, now we have multiple season passes in the course of a calendar year for games. There were obviously lots of microtransactions. There still are. There were loot boxes. And people probably had to be wondering, if they were paying attention, like, what's next? What does the next phase of business for this industry look like? If they're talking about, we're not making enough money, how can we make that money? What are they going to try and do to us next? Well, this is it. That if Sony have already been thinking about this sort of a pricing model where they're going to take big, humongous games, split the story for the single player campaign into multiple parts, and sell it to you for a little less than what you're used to paying to right up front, which is $70 at this point. Oh, well, we'll split the game up. You'll spend $50 now, and then you'll spend $50 a little bit later so that you can get the whole thing. I guarantee you that if Sony have already been talking about this and working on things behind the scenes in order to implement this sort of a marketing and sales strategy, other studios and publishers out there in the wild, they've already thought of it and they've already been talking about it. And they might already be working on a way in order to piecemeal their major franchise games out to you in a similar fashion. So while they're not looking to charge you hourly specifically, could games in the future, like a single player campaign like Grand Theft Auto 6, if the game is large and impressive enough and they spent enough money on it, could they consider charging you monthly? Will you just see more games in the future being fractured into multiple games so that you can't experience the whole story on day one? And once that sales strategy begins, when exactly is it going to end? I'm obviously concerned because gaming is not a cheap hobby these days as it is. You know, if you want a PlayStation 5 that has a disk drive in it, you're looking at $500. If you want an Xbox Series X, you're looking at $500. So people are already spending hundreds of dollars on this hobby just to be able to afford the hardware and any extra peripherals that they might need, and then the game on top of that. The hardware itself costs $500, but they're trying to justify spending $100 for just a single player experience that would have previously been sold at one SKU at one price point, in and out, and that's it. Now, it's entirely possible that there is another studio that will come along before Sony's Spider-Man 3 has a chance to, and they might incorporate this very same sales tactic. Whoever gets there first, it doesn't matter. The point is that if this rolls out for some game, whether it's Spider-Man 3 or a different one, as long as it's successful for them, other studios are going to follow suit, guaranteed. And not only are they going to follow suit, but they're going to try and do their best to condition people very slowly to get worked into these new business models so that they can eventually sort of get us to roll along with even more disgusting business practices along the way. Now, gamers have shown a lot of resiliency in the past. It wasn't that long ago that Microsoft decided, hey, we're just not going to do Xbox Live Gold anymore. And for anyone who's not really aware of the ins and outs of that particular ecosystem, and this is another thing to throw out there too, that if you're a fan of Xbox, if you're a fan of Sony, being a console warrior at this point, fighting the console wars, both companies on each side here, they're all looking to just take. Nobody's out there doing it for you, to treat you right. They're doing it, again, remember, to make money. So Xbox Live Gold, it was $60 a year, and this was something that Microsoft pioneered with the launch of the Xbox 360, but that's essentially what you had to pay into every single year just to be able to play multiplayer on the games on their platform. But over the course of time, they came out with Game Pass, which is sort of a Netflix of video games exclusive to the Xbox, Microsoft platforms. And they just said, no, we're going to do away with the Xbox Live Gold. We're just going to keep Game Pass. Game Pass, at least Game Pass Ultimate, was $180 for a year. Now it was, I think, $120 for more of a base level Game Pass, which meant at a minimum, if you didn't have the ability to get Xbox Live Gold every year, and all you really were interested in was having multiplayer access and you don't care about all the games that are on Game Pass, that means that they're effectively doubling the price from $60 to $120 just for you to be able to have access to online gaming. And people very quickly lashed back out. Microsoft were like, "Oh wow, this is huge." Like they had already sent out the cards, the retailers for these new pricing models, and they're like, "Well, we're going to have to pivot and walk away from this, and you're right, and we're sorry." And does that mean that they're done? Of course not. And that's really the game for them. Going through all these phases to be like, okay, let's see what works. Let's see what doesn't work. Let's see what really makes people mad to the point where we might be losing some business. Or let's see if we can just get them upset just enough to where maybe it ruffles a few feathers. But for the most part, people are going to just invest in whatever this new plan that we have is. And that's where we're heading. And we're heading into a spot where it's really starting to look very ridiculous, and that enjoying video games as a hobby, as a consumer, is going to be more and more pricey as time goes on. Gaming has been expensive as it is as a consumer. I know $60 has been the base price point for a very, very long time. I know that a lot of people out there have been bamboozled by these companies to say, oh, well, yeah, but like there hasn't been any adjustment for inflation over the decades that they've been charging us $60 per game. And while that's true, I would like to remind everyone that yes, maybe they haven't raised the price of video games up until the start of this generation, raising the price from $60 to $70 effectively, but you also have to remember that there are more and more and more people that have been hopping aboard the gaming train as consumers over the course of time as well. You could talk about the adjustment for how much these video games are costing because they're designing games for a much wider player base, because more people are going to buy these games than they ever have before. So when these companies come to you hat in hand and they're saying like, we're not making enough money, no, you had a choice, right? You could either raise the price of video games, or you could try and find other exploitive tactics in order to try and take the money from our wallets. And that's what they've opted for. They've gone for the microtransactions, the loot boxes, the DLC, the season passes. And in many cases, with many popular games, they layer these things on top of one another like crazy. Like Fortnite, they have a store that changes what's going to be available on it every 24 hours or so. There's always different skins to buy. They rotate them around, but you're going to have to wait. They also have season passes. Call of Duty has a season pass, and then they have a Black Cell pass on top of that season pass. They have skins that they sell all the time. And the base package is $70 as it is. It's wild. So yeah, I can't really say that I buy this whole thing of like, no, we're not making enough money. There are games that are legitimately doing well enough based on the skins that they sell, based on the season passes and everything else that they try and work in there, that those games are known as free-to-play games. They are there for you to download and play without any financial incentive from you out of the gate, at least anyway. But hey, maybe you see Back to the Future car in the Rocket League shop. Maybe you see some really cool skins in your favorite RPG. You know, maybe you want to get some different decals on a car in a racing game. I don't know, but whatever it is, these games make enough money from their revenue streams based on those things alone that they don't even charge you for the base game. Not only that, but there's a lot of games over the course of time that we have seen just sort of like money being squandered on. We recently learned that The Last of Us was supposed to have a multiplayer mode it's been worked on for a really long time. They were working towards some sort of release, but very recently we learned that project basically got canned. How much money, how many millions of dollars were squandered just to have that project abandoned? And how many other projects are being abandoned because they just don't seem to really do anything for Sony, and they don't really have a lot of confidence in them when they see them at a certain point? How many single player games come out with multiplayer modes that aren't even needed? And how often are video games launched in a state that's extremely buggy or broken and rattles the confidence of consumers so that they definitely don't make their money back? I think there's a lot of things that the video game industry could be doing in order to incentivize people to buy their games further instead of just looking for the grossest, slimiest ways to do so. And splitting up a game like Spider-Man 3 into multiple parts so that just to enjoy the story alone, you have to now spend $100 instead of $70, and to split them over the course of a year so that they can hopefully ensure longer engagement from you instead of allowing you to buy the game at launch, invest like 30, 35, 40 hours in the thing and then to drop it. Like, this is stuff that you really, really need to keep your eye on, that you really need to be aware about and to be concerned about, because the future of gaming is going to look really, really shady. It's going to look really slimy, and it's not a future that I'm looking forward to. But again, if this sort of a sales model works for someone, anyone out there in the industry, and you know it's going to come probably sooner rather than later, then we're all in trouble. All right, that's enough about this topic for today. If you like this content, if you like this video, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe, click the notification bell down below so you can see when I upload new videos. If you want to see more content like this, as well as gameplay video, I do have a Twitch channel, Byte-Size Impressions, all one word. Go there, check it out. Description has the link down below.